Okay, in today's topic, we'll discuss about typical implementation landscapes, so which we can simply call them as system landscapes. So, what kind of system landscapes you come across? So that's what our discussion is going to be. So, when you're speaking about implementation landscapes, remember one important point. Implementation landscapes mainly depends on the deployment solution. It purely depends on the deployment solution. What kind of solution we are implementing based on that. So they'll decide the system setup. Landscape is basically system setup. Like example, in a company, they want to implement one OLTP solution. So the kind of landscape setup they maintain is not the same when it comes to implementing a OLAP solution. So for transaction application and analytical application, landscapes will be completely different. So that's the most basic point what we need to understand. So today the landscape, what I'm going to explain you and we are going to look into is for a scenario called SAP HANA as a data warehouse, or you also call it as a data mart. So whenever we want to use SAP HANA as a warehousing solution, or you want to use HANA as a data mart, so what kind of system setup they'll maintain? That's what we are discussing here. So typically, any warehousing solution you take, any OLAP solution, or a data mart scenario, major things will be like this. As far as storage is concerned, you need a database. Then to analyze the data, you need to get the data into this database by using some ETL tools or some replication technologies. And once you replicate the data into the database, and finally you analyze the data by designing some reports. Wherever you go in the world, any customer anywhere. So typically a data warehousing solution will be like this. Those are the major three components you can say: database, ETL tools, and reporting tools. So it's nothing different even when we want to use SAP HANA as a data warehousing solution. It will be the same. Now look at this diagram here. This is how typically a system landscape looks like when you want to use HANA as a data mart. So it may look very complicated when we look at this landscape first time. But if you observe a little more detailed way, a little more deep into that, you'll be able to understand this very easily. And what you can see in that diagram is you'll be able to see whatever I mentioned, the database, there will be ETL tools, and even some reporting also. It's nothing different. So try to concentrate. See here, in the middle, Here you can see this one, this is your HANA database server. So what do you need for a database server, HANA database server to run? So you need certified hardware, that's what we call it as appliance, that is shown here, and operating system. They are showing SLES, SUSE Linux Enterprise Server, or even it can be Red Hat. Don't worry about the versions. Depending on the version of your database, the Linux versions will be. So, but what you need to understand is there is an appliance, there is a Linux operating system, and database server is installed. And they also install small components required. Don't worry about those small components. So basically, this is your database server. So once you have a database server, then the requirement is whatever the data you want to analyze, and that data you need to load into this database, this HANA database. That's a requirement. And the data in the company is available in different source systems, which we call them as data sources. You see on the left side here, you can find different data sources. So now the task is, from these different data sources running in the company, you need to replicate the data into HANA. So these data sources, just some examples they have shown here. Don't assume that you come across the same sources in every company. These data sources will vary from company to company, customer to customer. There's only some examples they are given like SAP, ERP, BW, any non-SAP. So it can be anything. SAP applications like ERP, CRM, SEM. Non-SAP when you're speaking about can be files like Excel files, CSV files, text files, Hadoop files. Non-SAP can be even a database, standalone databases like Oracle, SQL Server, DB2. Non-SAP can be applications like your Oracle apps, PeopleSoft, Siebel, anything. So we can't predict that exactly. This is practically impossible. So that varies from company to company, customer to customer, which I already explained you. Last class, we clearly discussed about different ETL tools which we can use depending on this different factors. So requirement is from these different source systems, data need to be replicated into HANA. And for that, we need to use ETL tools. And that decision has to be taken depending on advantages and limitations we have for each and every ETL tool, which we know clearly, all that we discussed in the last session. So from these different source systems to replicate the data, they just shown some examples of ETL tools like data services. So one of the ETL tools they've shown here. So from these data services, you can replicate the data. Using these data services, you can replicate the data into HANA. Or it can be SLT, this is SLT. Or can be even Sybase replication. Can be DXE. You want, you can add DXE here. Anything like that. So depending on those factors like type of source system, format of the data, conversion requirements, scheduling requirements, based on those factors, they'll decide these ETL tools. And then using those ETL tools, they replicate the data into HANA. So once data is replicated into HANA and data is stored in the form of tables, now Finally, they want to analyze the data by using some reporting. So when it comes to reporting, we know that there is no default reporting tool provided to you as part of the HANA licensing. We discussed about different licensing components, but part of that licensing, if you see, there's not even one single reporting tool. The reason is analysis requirement drastically varies from company to company. And not only that, within the company itself, different departments want to have different kind of reporting. And that too, most of the customers are already used to some specific reporting tools. So that's why SAP did not provide any of the reporting tools part of HANA licensing. Instead of that, they left this option to the customers. So as a customer, based on your analysis requirements, you have to decide which reporting tool you want to use. Maybe SAP reporting tools or non-SAP reporting tools. But whatever it is, whether the reporting is SAP or non-SAP, irrespective of that, when they want to do reporting on top of HANA, they don't do reporting on the tables directly. It's not at all recommended. Doing reporting on the tables directly is not at all recommended. But there comes the doubt, why? Why is it so? Because data is stored in the tables only. When the data is stored in tables, obviously we need to do reporting on the tables. But why we are saying it's not recommended to do reporting on the tables directly? There are multiple reasons behind that. One of the main reason is this. Suppose now I need to design multiple sales reports. But if I want to design sales reports, I may have to design those reports based on multiple tables. But usually, these all tables are replicated mainly from OLTP systems. So when we say they are all replicated from OLTP system, OLTP databases are highly normalized. Because of that, whatever the data we want, it's spread across multiple tables because of the normalization. So it's obvious that when we need that sales data, we have to design that report based on multiple tables. So every time you need a sales report, you need to identify those sales tables, maybe 10 tables, 15 tables, and you need to join those tables. Then you need to build a report. That's going to be very complex. So that's one most important aspect. Second thing is, if they do reporting on the tables directly, they will be able to perform only a two-dimensional analysis. So if you do reporting directly on the tables, that becomes only two-dimensional analysis. Why? Because table is only two-dimensional. Table is only a two-dimensional object. So obviously that analysis is only two-dimensional. But you look at any customer requirements you take, analysis requirements, they'll always look for multi-dimensional analysis. Always they want to perform multi-dimensional analysis. Because multi-dimensional analysis will give more scope and options when they do analysis. So how can you make this analysis as multi-dimensional? When we do reporting on the tables, it's only two-dimensional because the table is only two-dimensional object. So how can you make your analysis as multi-dimensional? So there's no way you can change your storage. Data will be always stored in the form of tables only. No one can change that. But what you can change? What you can change is you can change the presentation. The way you present the data can be changed. How is it done? To understand that, consider a small example. Suppose there is an image on the wall. You're having a picture on the wall. You're watching it directly. Imagine how it's visible to you. The same image, the same picture, you're watching through a transparent cube. Take a glass cube. Put it between you and that image. Watch that image through that cube. Now imagine, does it make any difference or not? So you know that whenever you watch that image through that cube, that glass cube, it looks differently in different directions, what we call them as dimensions. So that the image is not different, image is same, but the way it's presented to you is different because of that cube. Cube is allowing you to present that image differently in different dimensions. So that's what exactly they do with the data here. So instead of doing reporting on the tables directly, what they do is on top of these tables, they build those cubes, which we call them as models. In general, they call them as cubes, but technically you should call them as models. General terminology is cubes. So on top of those models only, they go for reporting. So advantage of using that model is once you build a model based on multiple tables, just that model is enough to create number of reports. They don't need to look at each and every table. Just one model is enough there for a set of reports related to that business process. And apart from that, that model will allow you to present the data in a multidimensional way. So they'll be able to perform multidimensional analysis. So because of those benefits, once data is replicated into HANA database, so there will be modeling consultants who build those data models. Once that is done, on top of those models only they go for reporting. So as I mentioned, once they build the models, they can go for any kind of reporting. It can be SAP or non-SAP. It's ultimately decided by the customer, not by SAP. Example, if customer is preferring to use MS Excel, Microsoft Excel. Excel is a reporting tool actually. So if they prefer to use Excel, usually they use it in financial accounting. Then you see this end user workstation here on the right hand side. This end user workstation, they have MS Excel. But if they want to do reporting on top of HANA, first they need to connect to the HANA database server. And for that, you need drivers. Those drivers are part of a small software called database client. So along with the Excel, HANA database client is also installed. And they'll establish connection to HANA database. They access the models and go for reporting. So that's why this connectivity is direct connectivity is given. There is nothing in between. Excel is directly connected to database server to access the models and go for reporting. Because Excel doesn't have any concept of servers. It's just a standalone tool. So they'll install it in the client workstations. But that's not going to be the same in case if customer is preferring to use BO reporting, business objects reporting. Why? Because the reason is if they want to go for business objects reporting, there is some procedure to design the reports. And there are developers, BO developers, who are responsible for that. So that's a big process again. What they had to do. So they had to set up BO server. Here you can see BOE, Business Objects Enterprise Server, we call it as. So they had to set up that BO server. And then these BO developers need to use some tools and establish connection to HANA. Then they create something called universes. And based on that universes only they build the reports. So all of these connections, universes, reports they develop, everything they'll save into this BO server. And finally, those developer reports will be accessed by the end users through web browsers. You can see that web access. So end user is basically accessing a report which is available in BO server, and BO server in turn connected to HANA database. So that's why here this indirect connectivity is shown. So it purely depends on what kind of reporting we are using there. So this is a simplified landscape. On the right top corner, you can see that there is something called admin workstations. It's also a workstation, but don't assume that it's used by administrators. It's a workstation where technical people are going to work. That's why they use that term. And they're given different tools here like HANA Studio. Like when a modeling consultant want to build data models, they do it by using HANA Studio. And then you have HANA client for connecting to the HANA database. And in case if a customer is using data services for loading the data, they need to design the data flows. How data is loaded from the source systems to HANA database. That is done by designing some data flows. A part of that, they need to connect to source, connect to target, mappings, a lot of things they have to do. All those activities they can perform by using a tool called Data Services Designer. And then you have Information Designer tool. As I mentioned in viewer reporting, they create these connections, universes, and all this. And they all do it by using Information Designer tool. And then you have any Excel based reporting, they use Excel. And sometimes web access to BI admin tools for RFC connections, batch job scheduling, so all that need to be done. And apart from that, even you can mention something about SAP GUI here, particularly when they want to work with SLT replications and DXE. You also need to use SAP GUI, and that also you can add here. It's purely a workstation where technical people are going to work. So typically this is what a landscape is going to look like. More or less the same landscapes you come across in every company wherever they want to use SAP HANA as a data warehousing solution. Or you can also say they want to use SAP HANA as a data mart. So you see this is the database. Like just an example I'm showing. A lot of tools will be there. There's a workstation. Workstation you can find a lot of tools which include something like data services designer, some reporting tools and all that. So this is the data services designer. And a lot of reporting tools will be there like crystal reports. So as you mentioned there is a tool called IDT, Information Designer tool. So all those tools will be available for you here to work with in the client workstations. This is installed. These are all reporting related only. Query designers, web intelligence reporting. This is IDT. You just take an example. If you go with Excel, so using this Excel, if you are trying to connect to HANA database, provided your client software is installed, see here you are getting something called HANA MDX provider, and that comes only when you install HANA client. Click on next. Basically, you need to provide server details. See what they are able to access here. See these cubes. That's the general terminology. Which technically we call them as models. So based on those models only, they build the reports here. They proceed with the report designing. Okay, so that's a implementation landscape. Just for your comparison, I'm showing one of the customer landscape. Try to understand that. and you do comparison of this landscape with what we have discussed till now. So this is a beverages company where SAP HANA was implemented. They were using SAP earlier. So they've implemented SAP HANA. So over 80% they have on SAP. So they preferred using HANA for warehousing, for analytics. Anyhow, we are interested in that landscape architecture. Look at this landscape architecture. Look at that carefully and try to do this comparison with what we have discussed till now. So is it the same or different? So you can easily realize that it's the same landscape, whatever the landscape we have discussed till now. Look at this. This is your HANA database. In the middle, on the left side, they have sources. One is ERP. They have that SAP ECC running with SQL database, from which they are replicating the data into HANA using SLT. It's a preferred option. Most probably they have done it real time. And then they have some non-SAP sources. We never heard of these non-SAP sources, but from these non-SAP sources, they replicate data into HANA using data services. Generally, that's what they prefer. Then once you have data from both sources, SAP and non-SAP, which they are shown at a third party. So on top of this entire data, there will be tables replicated from SAP application as well as from non-SAP. So combining that, they build the data models, as I mentioned, which generally you call them as cubes. Technically, we call them as data models. So once that models are built, on top of that, they go for reporting, and here they opted for BO reporting. So they maintained a business object server. And as I mentioned, they build a universe. On top of this universe only, they build those web intelligence reports, dashboards, and all that. Finally, they're given it to the end users. Not only this company, anywhere in the world, any customer you go and you see the customer landscapes, typically you find the same. There may be slight variations here and there, that's it. So it comes to the same basic point. Warehouse means three things: database, ETL, and report. So there must be some source systems from which they are replicating the data. So procedure is set up the database, replicate the data from different sources using ETL tools into the database, then build the models and design the reports, give it to the end users. They analyze the data. So the reason why I consider this landscape for our discussion is this is actually on all these solutions, different solutions we provide using HANA. This is the complicated landscape, which itself is pretty simple, but that's a complicated landscape. All other landscapes are very simple, easy to understand. That too, they are self-explanatory. No one need to explain you. Why I'm telling you that is, suppose take an example, one customer want to implement ERP on HANA, SAP ERP on HANA. What's the landscape setup you have there? You don't have anything like source systems, ETL tools, all this. Because ERP is a OLTP application. You just install SAP ERP application on top of HANA and use it. That's it. It's pretty simple. The basic classic three-tier architecture. That's it. New implementation, a new customer. That's why if you are able to understand this, any landscapes you can understand. See, our job is database administration only, but know about this. This will be really helpful for you. So is that clear? Any doubts you have? Tell me if you have any doubts. We'll go to the next topic. Okay, so our next topic of discussion is there is something called deployment scenarios. As I mentioned, mainly these landscapes will depend on what kind of deployment scenarios you come across. So what's the meaning of that? SAP HANA can be used in the companies in different ways. There are many solutions what SAP is offering to the customers using HANA. Typically, you call them as SAP HANA deployment scenarios. Or you can say solutions offered by SAP using HANA. So one of that already we discussed just now, that is HANA as a data mart. Okay, that I'm not discussing anymore. And second one is it's about applications. If you see in whatever the scenario we discussed just now, we don't have anything running on top of HANA. No application is there. You have HANA database. Within HANA only they build models. On top of the HANA directly they go for reporting. So there is no application running on top of the HANA database. You are directly working with the HANA database. You're interacting and working with the database directly. The second thing is, and the most important, applications. You can also run applications on top of HANA. There are many applications provided by SAP. So this we'll discuss in detailed way. So basically when it comes to these applications, you can have a subcategorization here. One, we call them as non-native HANA applications. The second one, native HANA applications. So this is how you can do categorization. So any application running with HANA database, either it has to come under non-native HANA or native HANA. So try to understand as first let us discuss about non-native HANA. Now look at this. Now I'm connecting to an SAP ERP application running in our landscape. This is actually ECC6 ERP application. And if you see, there is an underlying database. So I have a database here called MS SQL Server. Like this, you can see underlying there is a database. And then you have application running. So try to understand this. Generally, people in general statements they'll give us, they say that application is running on the database. So when we say this application is running on that SQL database, or application running on Oracle database, or if you run ERP on HANA, application running on that HANA database, it doesn't mean that those applications are running in the database. There is no way you can run applications on the databases. If you want to run the applications, you need database, no doubt. Because whenever you run your applications, you have some data, that data need to be stored. And the database is the place where we store the data. But try to use a little bit of logic here. This will be helpful for you to understand the concepts in a better way. So what is an application? Application is nothing but set of programs. So then when you are saying running an application means running programs. Running programs means executing programs. The point is, how can you execute application programs in a database? The basic standard statement you need to know is databases doesn't understand application programs. Generally, any database you take, database understands SQL. These are general applicable statements. I'm saying in general. Now let us see this. If you're speaking about SAP ERP application, this is basically an application. This application is developed. This is developed by using what? Which programming? That's the point now. It's developed by using ABAP. Advanced Business Application Programming, which is SAP's own programming language. SAP Zone. Obviously, running a SAP ERP application means we are speaking about running ABAP programs, executing ABAP programs. The question comes is, can you execute ABAP program in Oracle database? Can you execute ABAP program in SQL database? Can you execute ABAP program in HANA database? Simple answer is no, you can't. Now see, if I'm running some transaction here, because basically it's executing the program. Some program is executed now. But is it that that program is executed in database? Answer is no. When you request for some information from the database, that information you'll get. Like I need one of the table data. I can access the information from the database, underlying database. I'm just trying to fetch the data from database. This is all data coming from database, SQL database, MS SQL Server database. But to get the data, some programming, application program is executed, that is ABAP program. And that ABAP program is part of your ERP. Actually, the entire ERP application was developed using ABAP. So where is this ABAP program runs? We are saying it doesn't run in database, so somewhere it has to run. Where it runs? So here is the statement. Application programs runs in an application server. So your application program is executed in an application server. So very simple statement. Application runs on application server. So if you want to run my application, I need compulsory an application server. It's not just only having database. Database is only for storing the data and processing the data, but not for executing the application programs. Okay, so remember this point. This is the most basic point. Now your SAP ERP is an application which is running an application server. And underlying there will be a database to store the data, process the data and all that. So when you are speaking about SAP applications, based on this perspective, all the SAP applications you can categorize it into two. Because SAP has developed some applications using ABAP. So we call them as ABAP based applications. Applications developed using ABAP. And some of the applications were developed using Java. Just a moment. SAP applications only, but some of them they developed using Java. So
So you can call them as Java-based applications. So obviously, if you want to run these ABAP-based applications, we need one application server. If you want to run Java-based applications, you need another application server separately. Same application server doesn't work. So what SAP has done, simply they provided two application servers. One is SAP NetWeaver application server ABAP, NetWeaver application server ABAP, and another one is SAP NetWeaver application server Java. So these are the basic logics you remember, SAP related. These points are really helpful for you. So your SAP applications, either they run on application server ABAP or application server Java. Example, if you take ABAP-based applications like ERP, CRM, BW, all this comes under ABAP-based applications. Most of them are ABAP-based applications. So something like enterprise portal, knowledge management, all this comes under Java-based applications. So initially it was only ABAP, but later on SAP has introduced some applications developed using Java because they found some limitations in ABAP programming, particularly when it comes to developing web-based applications and all that. That's when they started using Java. So early 2000, that time period. So what you need to understand here is these all application servers will be outside the database. What are those application servers we are speaking about? It's called classical three-tier architecture. See this? See, HANA database you take. Then you have separately application server. Here only, on top of these application server only, you're running these applications like ERP, CRM, SEM, whatever it is, BW. Then you access from the client workstations. Okay, so that's a basic point there. So this application server, what you are speaking about is what I mentioned, SAP NetWeaver application server ABAP or SAP NetWeaver application server Java. On top of those respective applications are running, and end user will access through the client workstation using SAP GUI or maybe a browser depending on that application. Underlying there is a HANA database. So the bottom line statement here is there what you can understand, all those applications are running outside HANA database. Applications which runs outside HANA database, either on NetWeaver application server ABAP or NetWeaver application server Java. Those applications only we call them as non-native HANA applications. Example, SAP ERP, CRM, SEM, BW, all this entire list comes. Even latest version of S for HANA, BW for HANA. All these are non-native HANA applications only. Okay, first understand this. I'll come to that native HANA applications later on. We'll discuss one by one. A lot of discussion is needed Even tomorrow also we are going to continue our discussion on this. Because these basic points, if you have a clarity, it becomes very easy for you to working in the environment. There's a lot of people, they are not able to differentiate that application server and application. Those layers you need to separate. Even though you see them on the same system, same host physically, but you should be able to differentiate application server and application. Because anyone who knows SAP knows that, suppose I have my ERP system running here. If I want to create a user, I'll just go to SU01, I'll create a user. Even if you go to BW system also, transaction will be same, SU01 only. CRM system also SU0 only. SRM system SU01. SCM system SU01. That won't change. But if I want to create a sales order here in my ERP system, I use VS01 transaction. So if I run VS01, you can see at the bottom of the screen it will show you create sales order. But I can't run same VS01 transaction in BW. Because in BW we don't create sales orders. Because here this application is OLTP, that application is OLAP. Now that you should be able to differentiate. So the previous transaction code what I shown you, SU01, it's not a transaction related to application, it's a transaction related to application server. Whereas creating sales order is a transaction related to application. That is specific to ERP on. It doesn't run in BW kind of applications. So application server will be common. Whether you run ERP, CRM, BW, anything, all these applications are running on NetWeaver application server map only. So wherever that application server is common, same activity, same way you perform. That SU01 is a transaction of this application server, so that they'll be able to use the same transaction code, same screens in different applications, particularly for administrators, not for other people, for administrators mainly. Application server transactions will be same. So that's a basic thing. Anyhow, that discussion needs to be continued with what is this native HANA applications are, how they are different from these non-native HANA applications, why they termed like that. So that's what we are going to discuss. So this deployment scenarios topic will be continued tomorrow with further discussion on this. And again, under non-native HANA applications only, there is some subcategorization. I'll discuss on that subcategorization. Like we call them as on HANA applications, for HANA applications. What's the difference between those two? That also I'll explain you. So these things, if you are clear, almost any company anywhere in the world, any SAP solution which is based on HANA, you'll be able to work. You'll be able to understand first comfortably. Anyhow, HANA is there, HANA administration you can't. Okay. So once that discussion is completed, then I'll take up the questions on that, because if you have a clear understanding of native HANA applications, then most of the doubts will be clarified for you. It becomes more easier for you to understand environments. Okay.